I'm Evan Gudmestead, an instructor of application and web development at Rankin Technical College. Today I'm excited to bring a tutorial where we are going to build you will build your first .NET MAUI app. To demonstrate that app, this is a Android emulator. So .NET MAUI builds cross-platform both desktop and mobile apps. So this framework is really exciting for me because I've been teaching C# for over a decade. Now I can apply that C# to build both desktop and mobile apps in one framework, as it says. And so this is a pretty basic number to letter grade calculator that we're going to build. This won't take very long, and I'm going to show you the steps that it took me as a learner of this platform, several hurdles I had to get over to even get to this point. So we're going to build this app together, and then we're going to explore the common user interface controls, the UI controls, in .NET MAUI. So once we can build an app and run an app and just get those basics down, then we're going to look at all the different controls that a user can interface with or a developer can code to allow a user to interface with on their app. Now, in order to run an Android emulator, we're actually going to start by checking some BIOS settings on our computers. And so let's go ahead and reboot our computer. And you can see I'm kind of restarting here. Now, an Android emulator is a type of virtual machine. So as this is restarting, I can explain. In order for a virtual machine to run on a computer, you need to enable your hardware to be able to optimize for these virtual machines. Now, as this is rebooting, notice it says hit delete to get into my BIOS. So I had to hit delete on my keyboard. It was delete or F2. Your keystroke may vary. And so, there's a technique that I actually used when I did this all the time. I didn't know what keystroke ever to get in. I would actually just kind of swipe all the keys. But regardless, you got to get into your BIOS, and it'll tell you when your computer boots to get in. Now, don't let this screen intimidate you here, because what we're looking for, again, we're just going to enable our hardware to be able to efficiently run virtual machines. In order to do that, we're going to actually, if you have a search option in your BIOS, that's probably the easiest thing to leverage. And depending on your processor, there's Intel processors and AMD processors. We're going to look, it might be called something different. So you can navigate through all your BIOS settings. We could go down here into advanced mode, and we could kind of look through advanced mode, but since I can search, hopefully you have the ability to search. I'm just going to search for virtual. Okay, and you can see Intel VMX virtualization technology, and by default this is disabled. Okay, I had to enable this in my drop-down list. So go ahead, and if yours is disabled, go ahead and enable it. Okay, and that's going to allow that hardware. Now, if you're on an AMD processor, the terms might be a little bit different. We're going to be looking at terms like AMD-V or SVM mode, or it just might be called virtualization. So Intel is often called Intel VMX, as you can see there, or VTX. Virtualization, Intel virtualization technology. So go ahead and make sure that's enabled. And then what you have to do once you've enabled it, then we're going to go down and click save and exit. Okay, and if you have to kind of hunt and peck through your BIOS, you're going to have to kind of go through all these different options. If you have a mouse on your BIOS, hopefully you could use your mouse. Otherwise, you might have to use a keyboard to kind of hunt and peck through all your BIOS settings to actually find that. Again, it's really nice to have search. But nonetheless, if you have to hunt and peck, you can hunt and peck through there to find that setting, that virtualization setting. We'll go ahead and go back and save and exit. Make sure that you save and click OK. All right, now that virtualization is enabled in the BIOS, which is an important first step for that Android emulator, we're going to download and install Visual Studio Community. Now, Visual Studio Community is a Windows based IDE. And so if you are not on a Windows operating system, this is what this tutorial will be following. Now, my understanding is that if you're on a Mac and you have VS Code, there is an extension for coding .NET MAUI apps, but that's not what this tutorial will follow. So again, we're on a Windows operating system. Let's go ahead and click download. Now this downloads an installer tool, which will go on to run here. This is in my downloads folder. You can see I have highlighted Visual Studio Setup. I've downloaded that a few times. So let's go ahead and click on yes to run the installer and show you what option we need to select. Now this installer gives me this configuration options. It might download a few necessary items here. As you can see here, I just did this the other day, and so the running joke is, you know, this installer updates every time you take a shower. So took a shower, got a new update. Let's go ahead and run that update. For you probably don't have an update. You just run the installer if you're doing this for the first time. All right, now that's done patching, let's go ahead and click on launch. And I should get to the screen that you landed on if you installed it. No, I meant to click modify. This should be the screen. Launch actually launches Visual Studio. And what we're looking for is, as you would anticipate, .NET MAUI app UI development. So this is the checkbox that you want to go ahead and check, and then click to install. Now obviously I've already installed, and so that brings me to the next step. So go ahead and install. Now that I've clicked launch, we are ready to build our app. Your landing screen, you might have to close the welcome screen. You're going to land in Visual Studio Community, and we're going to click to create a new project. And if I clear all my filters, of course we want the C# filter, and you could select it down from there. There's just always so many different templates is what we're looking at here. My recent is .NET MAUI app. This one on the left is what we're looking for. On the right, we can scroll down and we might need to put another filter on this to find this, unless I'm overlooking it. .NET MAUI Blazor, that's not it. So if I select Android, that's going to help us filter it down. There's .NET MAUI app. Again, this is for desktop apps and for Android apps, so let's click next. This location is where it's at on your hard drive. Now for my students, you have a repository, and so I want to encourage you to GitHub repository. I want to encourage you to navigate to your local repository, and it looks something like this. Go ahead and create a new folder. This is, you know, at home. You could put this wherever you like, and this will be MAUI tutorials. And even within there, I'm going to create another one. I'm just going to call this the chapter 3. So if you're my student currently kind of following along, let's put it inside of your local repository. Let's make a folder called MAUI tutorials chapter 3. And let's see, what we're building is a grade, you know, kind of a grade calculator. So I'll just call this my grade calc. Click next. .NET 9 is the most current, so that's what we will use. Version of the .NET framework. Let's click create, and I'll wait. Okay, read a little bit about .NET MAUI on this overview screen. Again, cross-platform framework for desktop apps and mobile apps. And so that's what we will be learning this semester. Let's go ahead and close the welcome screen and close the what's new. And on the right hand side, you should have a Solution Explorer, which we can pin down. And we'll be getting familiar with all these different shells and windows and pages and all this as we go along. To kind of take a look at some of the files. Now, .NET MAUI is C# and what's referred to as XAML. Okay, XAML. XAML is based on XML. XML is a tag-based, and so all of these are referred to as tags. Language for describing data. And so what's great about XML is a lot of times these tags describe information that it contains. And so HTML, if you're familiar with HTML, you have tags, and XML is similar, but XML is considered more descriptive in many cases. And so anyways, XAML is very common in .NET MAUI as well as C#. And so when you have a .xaml.cs file, this is referred to as the code behind. So these two files are associated. Now normally you see them kind of nested underneath. So this XAML, app.xaml and app.xaml.cs, they're associated with one another. And once my compiler speeds up, the red squigglies should go away. So then we've got the app.xaml, the app.shell, the main page, and this is going to be where we're doing a lot of our work out of this main page, and the MAUI program. Let's go ahead and do a build. So no one likes the red squigglies, especially when you just are using the template, but I did a build and the build succeeded. So these red squigglies just need to catch up and go away. Now, as we are looking in Visual Studio, you're probably familiar with essentially these two options to launch our application. One is to start it without debugging, so debugging tools like breakpoints would not be used when you start without debugging. This is often the faster way of booting it up. And then starting with debugging tools. And so I'm just going to go ahead and click to boot this. Again, this is just a template app, and I'm going to boot it with the debugging tools, even though I don't really have anything going on. And you can kind of see the template app, how this works. Now this is a Windows app, right? This is running on my desktop. And so the beautiful thing is that this app could also be used on a mobile device. So even though I got the red squigglies, it's not causing any runtime errors or any compiler errors, essentially no errors. Those should go away. And again, normally the nesting of these files, you've got the XAML file, and then you've got what's called the code behind file, which is the .C# file. And normally they're kind of underneath, if you will, this arrow. And so my view is a little bit different over here. Let me take a quick look at that. I don't know why. Let's see if this is just an option that I have. File nesting is enabled by default. And so if I hover, file nesting is enabled by default. I ran this update and now Visual Studio is acting a little funny. I'm not sure if that's going to cause any issues down the road. Let's not worry about it for now. Okay, the next thing to look at is my Android emulator. Now, I already have an emulator installed, and so you might not have this listed here. Let me go to Tools, Android Device Manager. And so I'm going to click Yes to run this. And you could see I've got one emulator that's currently running. You're not going to have an emulator. Now, if you change this to Android emulator, if you just select this, my emulator kind of installed automatically for me, but let's just go through the process of, let's pretend that my emulator isn't here. So I'm going to delete this emulator. So you might be looking at your Android device manager that's empty like mine, or if it installed one by default, that's fine. Let's go ahead and click New Device Manager. I've kind of seen a tutorial or two where you actually want to delete the name here. Any spaces, I don't know that that ended up making any difference, but I'm just going to call it Pixel 7 with no spaces. It's also the case, that your RAM size, it gives it about, a gig. 1024 is 1024 meg is a gig, so call it a gig and a half. You probably want to increase the RAM that's allocated to your virtual machine. And about your PC. So if I search for my PC, let's click about my PC. I want to see how much RAM I have to allocate. So on my particular machine, you can kind of see I've got an Intel processor and about 32 gigs of RAM. I've got plenty of RAM to spare. I'm really going to increase this RAM. So, I'll say something like 6,000. It's not exact, but give it more RAM to run a little faster. So again, that takes the RAM away kind of from your operating system, allocates more RAM for the virtual machine. You can judge if the more RAM you give it, the faster it will run, but it'll make your base operating system, your base computer run a little slower while the virtual machine is running. So let's go ahead and create that. Okay, the next setting that I found very helpful to check, and I really struggled before I didn't have this setting checked, is this Android SDK Manager. And again, this just has to deal with hardware optimization for your virtual machines. And so as I go into that option, if I click this button right here, the Android SDK Manager, and then under Tools, I had to select the Android Emulator Hypervisor Driver. Okay, this was unselected for me, and I could not get any of my apps to actually launch. It was running so slowly that my apps would not launch. Probably if I walked away for 30 minutes and came back, maybe it would have launched. But the emulator was running so slowly until I checked this box, and then all of a sudden it started working. And so this was a hurdle that I had to kind of go down a little rabbit hole and find this checkbox again to optimize my hardware to run an Android emulator. So go ahead and check that box and apply the changes. And then once you've done that, let's go ahead and click on Android emulator, Pixel 7 Android, and let's boot it up in that Android emulator. Now, especially the first time, patience is a virtue here as this boots up. I'll pause the recording so you don't have to watch it, but let's wait. All right, we get a little Google splash screen. We're kind of booting up the phone for the first time. You'll notice my red squigglies eventually went away. I don't know that they all went away, but again, Visual Studio just had to catch up. I can very lightly see that Google spinner on my screen as the phone boots up. Okay, looks like the phone's booting up. Kind of see some things bouncing around on the phone. Now, if you clicked this play button, Again, it's still booting up for the first time. The app should be loading, and you can kind of see Visual Studio spinning in the background, so the app should still be loading and installing on the phone. Now, if I'm looking at the output window, there's still some work going on in the background. So the first time, again, my first time going through this, I struggled to get the app on this emulator. It's still working. Now I see this .NET icon. That to me is good progress. Again, just being patient here. Again, I just clicked this play button for the first time, and now I'm giving it time to install the app on the emulator. You can see the splash screen. Again, another good sign that the app is coming. And we're almost there. Again, you can see the output window over here, and we have the app running on a mobile emulator. Cool. So those were a couple of hurdles I had to go through. Let's go ahead and minimize this emulator. I'm going to click on the hot reload button, and let's look at Solution Explorer. One of the first things to kind of tinker with on the main page. This is this main page, and we're going to learn all about these different XAML files. But you can actually start to see some of those controls that we're going to work with in MAUI. We've got labels, we've got buttons, we've got an image, and so these are the controls that we're actually seeing on the screen. So that's in the XAML file. If I open up the code behind main page.xaml.cs, we can kind of see here that this is the code that runs when you click the button. And you can kind of see it increases this variable called count, and it goes up by 1. That's what count plus plus does. And then it tells you how many times you clicked. We can modify this variable to say, hey, instead of going up by 1, there's a shorthand count plus equals 2. Right now we're going to increment count by 2 because we clicked hot reload. Let's see now. We're counting by 2. Okay, so that's all good. Hot reload is working. What I'm going to do is I'm going to replace, let me close all the files. So if I just right click and close all tabs, okay, back to Solution Explorer, I'm going to open up my main page.xaml. So here I can see we got this content page. Inside of the page we've got a scroll view. So inside the page is nested a view. Inside the view we've got a layout, so some way of laying out the page. And inside of the layout we've got controls. So if I kind of highlight these controls are in the layout. I'm going to delete these controls because I'm going to make a grade calculator. So I'm just going to delete those controls, and the first control I'm going to introduce is a label control with a text attribute that says number grade, a style, and this style is this is going to be a heading, right? A big piece of text. And so if I say static resource headline, so this is a big piece of text. So the label itself, of course, is a control. The style says, hey, this is a big label. This is a headline label. And this is similar to a level 1 heading. So if you're familiar with H1s and HTML. And so the text that we'll see is basically the word number grade, and this is a heading similar to like a newspaper heading. So if I save this, it's kind of giving me this error message like, hey, counter button is no longer recognized. We deleted the counter button. So this code behind is doing something here. We don't need this anymore. So there's a little button up here to kind of comment out this code. Let's just comment out that code so we no longer have that problem. Oh, and by the way, deleting this counter button requires restarting the application. So let's stop the application. Let's read the error message, stop it. And if I were to click this, I might not yet see it right, so that doesn't work. So let's go ahead and click the play to start with debugging. And along the way, I read that this also does the install, right? So this actually installs on the mobile app. So this does a deployment, if you will. This does a deployment on the mobile app. Okay, so we see our new label that says number grade, and we know that we're on our way. So we have one new control that is a label. Now a text box in .NET MAUI is done with an entry control. And we get to name our controls with this name property. So you say X represents the current control, and the current control's name, I'm going to call it my text. So this is a text box, number grade. So this is just the identifier that I'm giving to my control. And by default, it's an empty text box. So I'll just do that. Now let's have a submit button. So a button, and again, this control's name is button submit. So this is my submit button. Text property says calculate, and we got this nice little XAML live preview, so we can kind of see what's coming together over there. Now, you often see these hints, like if you were to hover over the control, you'd get like a little pop-up, a tooltip, if you will. And when I click this, we're going to run a method called onCalculate. Okay, now this onCalculate method is not a method I've written yet, but we're going to write that in C#. So this is the event handler for the click event for our button. Again, not yet created. Horizontal options is fill. So again, that's a styling that it fills up horizontally all the space that it has. Okay, and so then one more control that I'm going to add is a label for the answer, right? So you're going to convert the number into a letter, and we're going to put the letter grade into a label. We're going to call this label letter grade. It says letter grade. Kind of the same style. Static resource, headline. Semantic properties, heading level 1. Okay, so that ends. We could put it on different lines or on the same line. That should all be fine. Okay, so these are the controls for our app. And now we get to write the C# for it. And so we need to go into the code behind file. This was the main page XAML. Ooh, looks like what did I miss? I left something. So we close the vertical layout, we close the scroll, we close the content page. Let me find my little mistake. Okay, this makes sense. It just doesn't, if you hover it, it says, hey, we don't know what onCalculate is, and that's going to be what we code over here. So in the code behind, we are going to make a method, private void onCalculate, and so the signature, again, we're going to learn all about methods and how to write these, but the signature takes an object data type and an event args. This is a very standard way of writing an event handler method signature. Okay, so now we didn't call it on calculate. I called it on, yeah, I did call it on calculate. Okay. Now let's go back and let's click save. I'm going to stop it from running to get it to, there we go. Now we got the squigglies that go away because on calculate when we click this button. And we can start off by just saying hello world. Now we're going to click this button. It's going to say hello world. If I click to install, just to get our event handler doing its thing before we actually write some logic, right? So let's get hello world working. Okay, so we get hello world working. So we've clicked the button, we've wired up an event handler so that this is the code that runs when you click the button. Now, okay, so pretty normally what we do, so we're gonna kind of empty this out. So we're gonna start with empty. So we're gonna get input from the user. Then we're going to determine the grade using if-else if block. And then we're going to output the letter. So input, kind of do a little calculation or do a little logic. Input, logic, output. Very standard series of events. Input, logic, output. So how do we get input from the user? We're going to make a variable called entered grade. So this variable is going to hold the value of our text box. So text number grade is our text box. That's the name of our control text property. So this line right here gets the input from the user. So what we're doing here is anytime you have this equal sign, what's changing is on the left of the equal sign. So the entered grade is what's changing here. So we're making this variable called enter grade, and we're assigning it equal to whatever is the text that's in the text box called text number grade. So this text property inside of the control named text number grade. So this ultimately the user can type anything. And so this is they could type in a number, right? They could type in a letter. And so what I would like to do now is but because they can type in anything, okay, the text property, and you can kind of see here, it returns a string. So we know what we receive from the user is a string. So what I want to do is I need to convert that string into a number. Because I'm going to need to compare that number against other numbers. And so in order to do this, right, I need to actually take the input from the user and make sure it's a number data type. And again, this is all, we're going to be learning about data types, and so this might be a little bit over your head. Don't this is all coming. If you're a new C# student, don't worry too much about this. But I need to convert the string into a number. And so that's the next step. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is I'm going to make an integer called numbered grade. And so entered grade is a string. Actually, I'm going to call this, number grade. And then I'm going to, I just need to write it. Convert the string into a number. So the way this is going to be done, I'm going to do this with a try parse. So this is just a way of converting the entered grade, again that's a string, into the number grade. Okay, and so the way the int.tryparse method works is if it can do the conversion, it will convert the string into this variable called number grade. If it can't, number grade will be, I believe it's a -1. So, you could do like if number grade is a -1, we know that they could not convert this into a number. So I'll just do label lettergrade.text. Please enter a valid number 1 through 100. This is a little error detection, okay? So I'm going to stop this from running, and I'm just going to run this. I'm going to put in a breakpoint, and I'm going to put in a letter, right? Because the whole objective is to put in a valid number 1 through 100. I'm going to put in a letter, which is a bad piece of input, and just show you a little bit of making sure. So, okay, so I put in the letter, and this is trying out your stylus. I don't really care about my stylus. So here is my letter. I'm going to click on calculate. I hit my breakpoint, and if I kind of go over it, number grade is 0. So 0 is the value that it converts to when it cannot do the conversion. So I need to actually, this is good that I showed that. Number grade is 0. Then it's an invalid input. So let's run that again. Forgot that it was 0, -1. And there's some other things we could do to test for valid input, but nonetheless, I can kind of step over. Now it'll go into my if statement. It'll say, please enter a valid number 1 through 100, and we get an input there. Now, however, if I say a valid input like 45, I click calculate, my try parse will convert number grade into an integer 45. Okay, so now we've got a good number, and we can write our standard if-else statement. So now what I'll do is I'll say else if, and this is pretty normal stuff, right? So else if number grade is less than 0 or is greater than 100, we could just do this case, right? We'll say, again, we'll say here, please enter a valid number 1 or 100. This could be written differently, but nonetheless, this is stepping stones, right? So these are both, I'm going to kind of invalid data. Okay, we are checking for invalidating. Check for invalid data. Okay, but if it's not 0, it's not less than 0, it's not greater than 100, then these are all the first two conditions. Check for invalid data. Okay, now after the first two conditions, now we got some good data. Else if, I'm going to say number grade is greater than 90, and it's looking at the code that I wrote before, we're going to say, hey, that's an A. Else if its number grade is greater than 80, then we know it's a B. And you can get the trend if it's greater than 70. Let's put in a C, so let's change our letters to be correct. Else if number grade greater than 60. By the way, this is not the official Rankin grade scale, but this is more standard. If you got A, B, C, you got D's greater than 60. Else, anything else, we know we'll call it an F. Okay. So let's save that. If we did the hot reload, which we didn't. Okay, pretty standard, conditional if, else if block. Did a little extra work, just making sure. Let's remove the breakpoint. Didn't mean to do that. Click continue. Okay, we did a little extra data validation. So if you put in these different values, it's going to make sure that we're at least getting a value 1 through 100. If I put in 100, of course we should get an A. If I put in 89, get a B. Okay, you get the idea. 79, should be a C. You always want to check the edge cases, so 80 is right on the edge of a B or a C, but this should equate to a B once I get past my breakpoint. Okay, good. So awesome. So there's a few extra steps into getting this .NET MAUI up and running for the first time. I hope that the stumbling blocks that I found when I was going through this installer and these different options, because I hit a lot of errors along the way, I hope that I help resolve any potential errors that you might have. And we did build our first .NET MAUI app. Of course, this app, as I've been demonstrated, works on an Android emulator, and it works on a Windows machine. And of course, it should work on the different emulators as well, iOS. And come to find out, yeah, Android and iOS and Windows desktop. Okay, and here's the app. It looks just the same, but this is the actual desktop app that would run on your desktop machine. I've meant to take that breakpoint out 10 times now, and I just keep forgetting to take the breakpoint out. Okay, the last thing I wanted to do is kind of go over some of the common controls that you're going to find as you're new to this .NET MAUI. What are the different controls? We've looked at a label, a text box, and a button, but what else is out there? And so these are user interface controls. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a project to my solution. So I'm going to right click on project, I'm going to right click my solution and add a new project to it. This is the .NET MAUI app, just the same, and I'm going to call this UI controls exploration. And let's create that. And let me close the other XAML files. I must have selected something. See, now all of my code behind files are nested properly underneath. I don't know what I selected under my grade calc. Kind of curious if I go back and look what option I selected, but this is how I've seen it most of the time, that the code behind C# file is nested underneath the XAML file. All right, then what we do, instead of running grade calc, you change the startup option, right? So this is the different projects in my solution. I'm going to click on UI controls exploration. So now when I click start, it runs the correct project. You can actually see it's actually bold over here in my solution. And so that's telling me that I'm running which project in my solution. Okay, and what I'm going to do on this default templated app is just as I did last time. I'm going to go inside the vertical layout, the vertical stack layout. I've got 4 controls here, and I'm just going to delete them. Now, to look at these controls one at a time, here's what I'm going to do. Now that these are gone, if I save all, I'm going to boot this up to an empty user interface. I'm going to click hot reload. I'm going to bring these controls in one at a time. We should be able to look at them one at a time. Okay, so here's our app, and this is I just got it loaded here on Windows. And I'm going to click on hot reload. And the first control here, now I do have a label associated with it, is a multi-line text input. And so instead of a single line text box, this is more of a text area where you can write some paragraphs, or feedback, if you will, on your app. And so multi-line text box, this is like, hey, you're gathering information from like a survey a lot of times, right? So that's a multi-line. The next is just a simple image. And so here, this is a label that I associate here. Now there's also a label for my image. Now images are interesting because there is a image under resources. If I go to Solution Explorer, Resources, Images, this is actually the folder on my hard drive where this image exists. So you hear .NET bot. So we have an image tag with a source attribute, and then we can give it a height in pixels and a width in pixels. So there's our sample image. So we got multi-line inputs, we got sample images. Let's continue. A checkbox, so a very normal control is a checkbox. Here we have a label that you notice I'm actually inside of my vertical stack layout, I'm nesting a horizontal layout. So we can get next to the checkbox, which we give that checkbox a name. We associate that label, and the label will be right next to the checkbox, right? So we can change our layouts, or we can nest layouts, of course. And here's a very standard checkbox control. So of course, I would encourage you to just kind of save these in your toolbox, if you will, code these out, and have them for future reference. Radio button. So here's our label. It says choose a color. We have a vertical stack layout just to get these on top of one another. Of course, the group name will make it so that you can only select one of the group, right? So that's how we're going to code a radio button element with a group name of colors, and that makes it so you can only select one radio button. So just continuing on in our common controls in .NET MAUI, we got a switch on or off, a toggle switch. So here's a switch control. Give it a name. Here's a label associated with it. We're going to put it in a nested horizontal, so they'll be next to each other. So I'm sure you've seen these switch controls. Again, you can then determine what that does in the C# code behind file by changing that switch and making an event handler for it. Here's a normal slider control, a minimum value, a maximum value, and a starting point. So this says a volume control. So we can drag our slider representing our volume or whatever you want to slide. Versus a stepper control. So a slider control versus a stepper control. Again, these nice, just what you would call semantic tags. They describe what's in them because it's an XAML file. That's what it does really well. Now I actually don't have any indicators by showing that I change the stepper control to go up or down. I actually don't have this coded, but this is what the stepper control does, kind of steps up by one, steps down by one. Again, you'd have to code the functionality behind that. Very nice to have a date picker control. So no extra attributes, and you get all this calendar control, current year, current date. Of course, this goes by your system date and time. So today's May 14th. So there's our calendar control with a date picker. Time picker, pretty simple control, same thing, time picker. It is great to have this functionality, just so easy to code. And back in the day, coding these very standard controls it was a lot harder to make your own calendar controls and the like. Another very common control is a drop-down list, right? So a drop-down list in .NET MAUI is called a picker control. Okay, and your picker control, a lot of times the source of a drop-down list might come from a database. In this case, it's an array of strings, and the strings are just apple, banana, and cherry. And so here we've got a drop-down list of strings. So a picker control. A search text box, a search bar, very common on our apps to search. And so this just is a text box with a magnifying glass. and a placeholder that says type to search. So as soon as I start searching for my name, okay, it replaces the placeholder, of course. So there's our search bar. And last but not least, a progress bar shows our progress. So if I say 0.75, this is a little hard to see, but our progress bar is a little loading bar. You can see the purple indicator is 75%. If I change it to 25%, you'll see that the progress bar is 25%. If I had a little bit more margin at the bottom, let's see, we see, you know, padding and spacing, and we'll learn how to do some margin here. But just wanted to kind of quickly hit on these different controls that are common controls. .NET MAUI, this is not the full list. You can see the full list of controls in .NET MAUI. You'll see about the different kinds of pages and the different kinds of layouts. All we used was horizontal stack and vertical stack, but there's many other layouts. This is all, you know, to come in learning MAUI. But as we scroll down, these are our controls. Activity indicator, border, buttons, checkboxes, date pickers, right? So I just picked several of the common ones, but there's many more to cover. So that's the end of this tutorial. You know, again, I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you got to build your first .NET MAUI app and put it in an Android emulator or iOS emulator and got to explore these different common controls.